Well, let's have a few questions from the floor. If you can just raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. Gentleman here.
Good evening. I'm Sanjeev Kumar. I'm the founder of Change Partnership. This is a fascinating conversation. I just want to pick up on one thing that you said, Sim, from a presidency perspective. You said that you're happy for no one member state to impact negatively on another member state. Now, the elephant in the room is that you haven't talked about fossil fuels and the massive fossil fuel subsidies that are being supported by Clean Energy Package. Could you give us a bit of a vision on how you see the 550 grams limit within the capacity mechanisms and also within the ETS modernisation fund, both of which will actually have significant impact, not just in other member states, but the rest of the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Sim?
Yep, a good question. I won't go into the details, but I believe you can read it on EURACTIV as of today. Some fresh news, but it's something that that we need to consider in a holistic context. So really about capacity mechanisms and the 550, the issue is not only of the capacity mechanisms and of the 550, but it's in general emissions from market participants that don't work on the normal everyday intraday market. So this is where the discussions in the council are taking place right now. So I don't have a good answer, but I think the council generally agrees that there needs to be limits to the emissions that come from these non-market, regular market participating installations.
Okay, thank you. One other question here, gentlemen.
Thank you. Ray Schonfeld, Single Market Ventures. I'd like, if I can, to try to broaden the discussion of a point that Sam Kimmins made about the role of financial innovation in the growth of renewables. And if I may, without any disrespect at all to Pierre, if I may bring in solar, because that really hasn't been treated very much there. I'm curious to know what you think. I'd be even more curious to know what Megan Richards thinks, but unfortunately the Parliament has sway over her, for good or for evil. The solar has a fundamental difference, and particularly solar rooftops, from wind farms and what you've been talking about. Wind farms are big, right? Nobody doubts that they have a role in the energy mix. Solar rooftops are small, very small. You have to have a very big facility indeed, very big roof, in order to justify even 1 megawatt. Some of the great big data centers, they probably do. They're over that threshold. But they're still small compared with the big wind farms. Now, that creates a huge financing problem. Solar has been driven for the last 25 years by project finance, and we're talking just about the financial aspects. It's been driven by project finance and direct or indirect subsidies. Neither of those apply increasingly now. Solar's becoming competitive. You don't need the subsidies. That's was always the theory. The installations are too small for project finance. And there's a problem of getting the finance, at least from my perspective.
So how should we address the question?
So the question is that a problem as you see it? Do you see a real need for financial innovation to finance the growth of solar that we have not yet treated tonight?
Sam?
It's happening. So I've just seen our new video and it's full of rooftop solar. From people such as IKEA, Walmart, a company I can't name because they've not joined yet. It's enormous, and companies are investing in this, and the finance is often coming from the company itself. It's a relatively small, each installation is relatively small scale, so they finance it, and then they get a return on investment in about 5 years. I'm not really seeing a big challenge.
Okay.
Utility scale solar?
Yeah, well, also, yes. I mean, also, another one of ours, if I have my slideshow, I flick it back to the utility scale solar, and AB InBev launched an enormous Mexican solar plant the day Trump pulled out the Clean Power Plant, and their strapline was Mexico in the lead. It's rather wonderful piece of non-political advertising there. But yeah, it's happening. It's happening.
Quick comment from Sim, then Jonathan. Let's take these three questions together, and then we'll close on the questions. Sim.
I think I can agree it's happening, but it's also happening on a residential scale, because I mean, even our like the greatest evil in our country in the energy sector, the publicly owned old fossil power company now is offering residential contracts. So they offer to set up your own residential rooftop. They have a financing scheme, so you don't need to pay for everything in one time. And I think all these energy efficiency, energy service companies increasingly are providing this service as well to people who don't want to be engaged in all the technical financial aspects, who don't want to get an additional loan. And I'm really happy to say that European legislation, for one, is supporting this. I think Claude mentioned this earlier today, that the Eurostat accounting new rules now allow don't treat certain types of energy performance contracts as loans, depending on who owns the assets. And that really opens the doors for local governments as well.
Okay, thank you. We're going to just take the three short questions, please, and then we'll put them all to the panel together.
Yes.
Who you are?
I think it's okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, I think the transition was perfect for my question, because I think what is good with solar is that indeed it is smaller. So, sorry, I'm Aurélie Beauvais, Policy Director for Solar Power Europe. So my question was to Sim, actually, because we think that well, maybe the Council has not been doing properly what we were expecting from him regarding the protection of small installations in the current framework. I think, and I hope you are aware, that in several member states there are no balancing markets, there are no aggregation markets, heavy monopolies, and actually the Council is planning to expose the small installations to market risk by leaving it to the member state choice to expose them to balancing responsibilities. We think it's a clear threat, and that market conditions should be coming first, and I would love to have your opinion on that.
Thank you. Gentlemen here, short question, please.
Ansgar Kine, Greenpeace. I cannot but address you, Sam, because you mentioned us before. Thank you for that. Yes, so we see that an okayish proposal by the Commission has ideally improved during the past year in the process in the Parliament. But what we see now is that there's severe headwind from a couple of member states to weaken the progress that we need to make in the next decade. What we'd love to see from you and the ARIA 100 initiative is to put your economic weight behind member states and please get engaged in advocating for stronger renewable legislation, because if you want to become 100% RE powered businesses, this electricity needs to come from somewhere. So someone needs to produce it, and ideally there's thousands and millions of Europeans who produce it. So please weigh your economic weight behind it and put pressure on the member states, because now is the time to make them aware of a democratized energy system and markets.
Thank you for that. And last question, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan Gaventa from E through G. My observation from listening to the very good discussion is that I feel like the technology and business model has been outstripping the pace of the politics. The discussion of the clean energy package has basically been about how do we implement an agreement that was put in place between heads of government in 2014. But we also heard in 2014 RE100 didn't exist, and so there wasn't this movement of corporate sourcing. In 2014, we didn't have the same perspective on the potential for digital energy to play a role in this, and in offshore wind was twice the price back then as it was now. So my question is, are the numbers that were agreed in 2014 still relevant at all?
Okay, first of all, you win the soundbite of the evening competition with tech is outstripping politics. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Pierre, you want to respond first?
Sure. Indeed, there's a huge lag between what was discussed by heads of states and governments back in 2014 and what we're discussing today. So the 27% renewable energy target is not where we need to be. That's extremely clear. It should be at least 35%, and we know that because there's been extensive research done on this. Irene has done some work showing that the cost-effective trajectory is probably closer to 34-35%. So if we only want to be cost-effective, not even ambitious, not even trying to be globally leading, but just cost-effective, it's at least 34-35%. So we need to factor that in. All that was based on very, very old figures, outdated technology cost figures. And you alluded to this. The European Commission thought at the time that offshore wind was going to cost 90 euros per megawatt hour by 2050. And I mentioned that it's already 50 today in 2017. So that has been a bit of a mess, and we need to look at that very, very closely and fix that ASAP. The European Parliament is helping on that front. And once we have the right ambition level, we need to make sure that that it's delivered. And there again, you were talking about the Rubik's Cube. What's keeping me up at night is the whole discussion on the governance. On renewables, we had a very, very simple system. We had a EU level target of 20% broken down by in-member state targets, etc. Now we're talking about very wishy-washy reporting requirements, the European Commission coming in with recommendations that the member states won't follow. Then you will have gap-filling measures, but there's 4 different options with no hierarchy whatsoever as to how to fill this in, etc., etc., etc. This is not what investors need. We've been talking about creating investment certainty, clarity for investors going forward. It's very simple. We have the example of the Netherlands. They've done this. They said to the offshore wind industry, we'll give you 700 megawatts per year, we'll tender this out, and you need to cut costs by 40%. And this is what happened. Who won? The energy consumer, the supply chain developed, and basically the Netherlands is on the map as one of the global leaders in offshore wind. So we know what we need to do. We just need now to translate this in the governance regulation. Give us at least 3 years of visibility, what the deployment is going to be. Tell us how much wind, how much solar, how much repowering there's going to be going forward, and go into a lot of detail on the market design. How do you solve the problem of overcapacity? Member states need to say this under the governance legislation.
Okay.
Et cetera, et cetera. So this is really what's keeping me up at night, and I think the ambition level is really the strong starting point for that.
You should see my
Sorry
list
for
of
going
things
a little
keeping
bit
me up at
long,
night.
but yes.
We're running out of time, so short answer, Sam. Are you going to put your organization's advocacy weight, economic weight behind this change?
We are doing. So, yes. And just to answer the question about the point of the pace of change, I spoke with IKEA a few weeks ago, and they're saying they have to change their sums every 6 months to keep up with the pace of change. So that gives an example of how frequently the Commission should be changing their sums.
Okay, Siim, you get last word on this. The Council is not doing enough to protect the small players. Is that right? Would you like to buy some indulgences for this?
This now you will have to edit out, but no. A couple of points I would like to make, and feel free to cut me off when I drift off. About the ambition. So the working method in the Council is that the Prime Ministers don't always decide on the operational matters. So the Council conclusions say at least 27%, based on the knowledge and the positions of the Member States that were actual in 2014. The heads of state have not discussed this topic anymore up until now, but I am 110% sure that they will. So I don't think we should need to focus now on the targets, coming to the small installations now. we should get the toolbox right, and this is where we are. We are at the working level. So I think consumers, there might be consumers here that are balancing responsible. Most likely they are. I don't know how many of you realize that you are. I am, back in Estonia, balancing responsible, but the regulation is drafted in a way that the electricity supplier takes that balancing responsibility from me. They get some benefits out of it. They get to play in the intraday market and so on if I have my solar panels. But one thing I think what the regulation should ensure is that once there are some sort of obligations in place, there are also these nitty-gritty details that allow to take off the burden from the really small players. So happy to discuss this further, and we've been receiving your position papers. Good reading, but but I wouldn't put it in completely dark colors.
Thank you. Let's close there. Thank you for all your participation in this also. Megan Richards, who has left us, our appreciation for the time she spent with us this evening. Pierre Todieu, Chief Policy Officer at Wind Europe, thank you so much for taking time tonight with us. Siim Malist, the Councillor for Energy, Permanent Representation of Estonia to the EU, and Sam Kimmins, Head of RE100, the Climate Group. Let's also thank Microsoft team, John Frank, and the team for such an excellent organisation and putting everything together so well for us tonight, and our camera crew and Evan, who's floating around somewhere, for organising all you'll see next week as well. So on behalf of EURACTIV and John's team from Microsoft, thank you. One final thing before we close and let you go upstairs. There is a calendar date for you, the third in our series, November the 16th, Digital Evidence, Europe's Fragmented Crime Scene. You can check out on EURACTIV's website. We'll be sending some information out about that as well. Now, please thank our guests and also join us for reception upstairs. Thank you. Thank you.